August the 31st, 136 years ago today, poor Polly Nichols was murdered over in Bucks Road. I'm with Jamie here. He's a YouTuber with War Cry
Publishing, and mainly an author, but a
YouTuber and an author. Yeah. Wrote a book.
I'm not
something
an expert,
about Whitechapel.
But I did something called There's Something About Whitechapel, which is Morrissey said it on stage a couple of years back. Morrissey's obsessed with this area, the Whitechapel murders, all this kind of thing. So I use that as a title. But obviously, you guys are the real kind of hardcore elite, if you like.
Yep. So you've got a great interest in the Jack the Ripper mystery.
So I mean, this sounds really bizarre, but from the age of 11, I was obsessed with it. So I watched the Michael Caine film, and so it was at 1991, and I just went on, and I mean, I'm 44 now, and it's just never diminished. It's only got kind of stronger, and you know, I watch yourself and Richard Jones and all that, and you've kept me in hours and hours of content. So thank you very much.
Well, we're at Doveton Street, and we're going to go the route of Charles Lechmere on his route to work. So we'll go this way.
So if you go onto that line, if
No, he lived actually over here.
Right.
So his house would have actually been I always reckon about here. The front of the house would have been on the road, so the door would have been on the road, and the house are in here. If they stripped this ground away, I reckon you'd still see the footings of the house.
Right.
It was all bombed or bomb damaged in the war, and they replaced it. But the footings of his house would have been about here. And I think the line under the brick wall here is, I reckon, is actually the original footings of the front of the houses.
How long did he live here then?
He moved in 1888. He moved away, okay, I don't know the exact date, about 1900, 12 years. But he lived in two different houses. He lived at 22, and then he moved away for about 2 years to Sceptre Street over there, and then moved back. And he had a shop there, actually, as his first business. And although he continued working as a carman, he had a sideline business. And when he moved back to 24. Right. So they decanted half the people in this row, moved them out, and then moved them back 2 years later. And I've got, this is an interesting thing actually, I've got plans of all these houses from Tower Hamlets Archives. This was part of what was called Mile End Old Town from their records. And they did drainage work here, because when they built these houses, this row of houses, probably about 1850 I'm going to guess, the drainage was quite poor. They'd have had very thin pipes out to a water closet thing at the back in their back garden, and they redid it all. They redid all the plumbing in the underground pipes and stuff. I'm pretty sure that's why they moved everyone out and moved everyone back, because I've got the plans of that date between when he was at 22 to 24. And I've got the drainage plans for the houses with all the plans of all the drains.
But what's really striking for me is he's talking literally 136 years ago today. He left his home here.
That's right.
And found the body, allegedly.
And I'll just tell you one thing quickly. You know Nielsen, Dennis Nielsen? Did you see the film Dennis?
Yeah.
Dennis, very good film, with Tennant in it, isn't it? Very good film. Yeah. He got caught because the drains got blocked up, didn't he?
Yeah, of course.
And the rent-a-kill came around and found bits of body part in the drain. I am curious what would happen if they dug up these drains and why they had to dig them up and replace the drains, and why he had to move out for that period. That's what I've got a theory, that if he dug up, and an archaeologist come and dug up the theory, you'd find stuff blocking up the drains now. Anyway, let's move on his route to work.
So you've obviously done this many times. How long do you think the walk?
Right, so Lechmere would have left his house Doveton Street, walked down Cambridge Heath Road. Normally he would have gone this way to go towards Bucks Row. When he felt like killing, I think he carried on to Whitechapel Road, did a right down Whitechapel Road, which was busy, more likely to find a potential victim. I don't think you would normally find a victim in the quiet back streets, but we'll go this way. Okay, I'm back with Jamie Boyle. We're outside Sainsbury's. Robert Paul lived in here. Lechmere, if he wasn't on the main road finding a victim, he would have supposedly walked past Robert Paul's house with the brewery over here, and Robert Paul could have seen the brewery clock to tell exactly what the time was as he was walking 40 yards behind Lechmere, 50 yards maximum in this direction towards Bucks Row. To carry on. So here, Paul, when we get to this lamppost or this telegraph pole, this is roughly where if Lechmere was walking in front of him, he'd have been about here as Paul come into the road behind there and been walking down here this far behind, that far behind him. And don't forget, they'd have had heavy work boots on. They'd have been dead quiet. There'd been no real ambient sound noise, and it doesn't have any. And it was actually narrower. The pavement was only to about here. And there's quite a tall building here. It was like a canyon, so there doesn't have any credibility that Paul didn't hear Lechmere, and Lechmere didn't hear Paul behind him as they were walking down this road.
So, 136 years on, I've watched a lot of stuff. A lot of people are, you know, it's black and white, it's grey. She was there, is that. Where exactly, in your opinion, was Polly Nichols laid?
She was more or less exactly where this bike is. Pretty much here. This is the bridge over the railway line that was there. Brown Stable Yard was here. The gate is here, and she would have been laying more or less where that bike is.
And I've often wondered, the thousands of people use that every single day are completely probably oblivious to the fact that this is where it all began.
And often, I don't know why they've left this little bay here, but often, I film here quite a lot, there's nearly always someone urinating over in the corner there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's you don't really capture the scene, do you?
I think it's quite ironic also, and it dawned on me when I was here the last couple of years, is obviously this is the location of the very first Jack the Ripper murder, the Everest of British crime, if you like. If you head onto that road, it heads onto Vallance Road, so you've got the most notorious serial killer that ever lived on with the most notorious gangsters that ever, you know, so it's literally, the stories are literally that close. Yeah,
well the East End is like that. And that's the only original building, the board school there.
So that was 2 years before the murder built?
Yeah, I think you're right, actually, yeah. Now you say that, yeah.
So for people watching this, if, you know, go back 136 years, her body would be exactly where that bike is?
And where we're standing now, where I'm standing now, is where Lechmere supposedly was roughly when Robert Paul saw him down there. And if the body, I'm in the middle of the road, that tells you how close Lechmere was to the body.
And of course, Dr. Llewellyn examined it. His surgery was literally a stone throw from here.
Well, just over there, yeah, just round there.
Right. It's kind of thought-provoking, it's more powerful. We are here on the anniversary. As I said earlier, I've never, you know, it's quite a thing in the East End on the dates, and you know, it kind of almost brings it home, almost that little touch more.
Yeah, and yeah, we'll carry on and follow the route down this way.
So I've watched a lot of ripperologists, and they're convinced that when Jack did what he did, he disappeared through woods buildings, and of course just disappeared into the masses of people. You have a different theory on that, don't you?
Yeah, I don't think woods buildings, because there's a guy called Mulshaw, a night watchman, who is down there, would have probably seen him. Also, he's doubling back on himself. I think he went down this way because it's Lechmere, but I think Lechmere met his victim, who was Polly, obviously, on Whitechapel Road, just down there. This is Court Street, and came up here with her, went over there, and that's where he murdered her. And interestingly, over here was where there was a gate into Great Eastern Yard, and that's where there was a railway policeman on duty just over here as well, strangely. When they left the body, Paul and Lechmere, they could have alerted the railway policeman here. They must have known. They're walking this route every day on the way to work. They must have known there was a railway policeman on duty here. When they went past, he was probably having a fag or something, but they could have called him and brought him down, alerted him, but they didn't. It shows they weren't really interested in alerting the nearest policeman.
Yeah, because I mean, it is really, what's the word? It's really kind of like almost unbelievable. You find a body. I know it's a different time and a different generation, era, if you like, but that's quite a big thing. I don't think, I know it's the East End and there's people are dying and all that, but to be so flippant and go, all right, well, it's okay, we'll just travel down there. And obviously it wasn't Vallance Road then, it was Baker Street, was it?
Baker's Row, yeah.
Baker's Row. So, it just doesn't add up.
No, there's lots of things that don't add up. But we'll carry on anyway. Okay, now we're at the location where Lechmere and Paul met PC Misen. They come around the corner from Bucks Row. And at this junction we've got Baker's Row, which is now Vallance Street, where the Krays used to live as way up there. We've got Old Montague Street. This here is Hanbury Street. And this is where they met PC Misen.
Yeah, so this is literally, they've just seen the body and then they come in and they see a police officer and say, right, you better get back there. As I said, it's quite a grey area that. It's just, as I said, I know the East End's a very, very different place back then, 136 years on, but I don't think it's every single day that you find a body and then you can just go, oh, well, we'll just go crack on to work. Just doesn't add up.
Do you think the Krays knew about this story that happened virtually on their doorstep?
I think everyone, so I've spoken to obviously so many different people connected to Mickey Duff's, the book I'm doing at the minute. So everyone grew up on the stories and, they were born in 1933. So this was what,
it's not much more than 50 years later, is it?
So
it's 55 years later.
Yeah, it's people's lifetime. It's people, the the grandmother Cannonball Lee and the other one, Jimmy Kray. He would have been aware. You know what I mean? It's like I've spoken to so many people over the years, and it's almost like the bogeyman stories. I remember talking to Richard Jones, and he used to go in the pub, which was.
The Grave Morris?
The what?
The Grave Morris?
Yeah, so that was Ronnie Kray's local. And the people would be in there in the 80s and they'd be like, oh, my mum met him once, but she said, oh, I'm not going to kill you because you're a nice girl. So it's kind of mythical folklore and it snowballs and it escalates and a lot of untruths. So the East End relatively is a small place. And when I'm not talking about East London, I'm talking about the East End, which is E1, E2, E3 and E14. I think it's something like 14 to 16 areas. So your Mile Ends, your Stepneys, your Spitalfields, your Bethnal Green, Whitechapels, so when you were asking me about would they have been aware of the story, I mean that was only 1888, so they were born in 33, so they were kind of grew up in bogeyman stories, if you like, it's kind of very much with, the Lee Duffy thing in Middlesbrough, and as I said, I've spoken to various members of people around Mickey Duff, and he was aware of so he was born in 1929. Yes, he was a Polish Jew, but he grew up in actually Hanbury Street, Spitalfields. So, yeah, he was very aware of it, and it's a thing that, like, mythical. People would have threatened if you don't go to bed, that's how it kind of goes on. Society goes on. As I said, a lot of untruths and kind of things get attached to it, but because it's so long ago, well, it's okay. Well, and that's how it snowballs, and tall stories become ridiculous.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll carry on a bit further down Hanbury Street. So here we are now outside the location of 29 Hanbury Street. We're on the 8th of September. Poor Annie Chapman was murdered in the backyard, sort of 10 yards in this direction, 15 yards in this direction. And by coincidence, Robert Paul and Charles Lechmere, as they're walking on the morning of the murder of Polly Nichols, they walk right past this place, which is, in my opinion, more than a coincidence.
Yeah. Also, I think it's a little bit ironic how, obviously, that was the first murder. They tell the policeman, and then they walk on past the murder that was going to happen in a couple of weeks.
Well, 8 days actually.
Yeah.
8 days. And I'll probably release this film on the day of Annie Chapman's murder.
Yeah.
To coincide with that anniversary.
So just talking about, obviously, we're at the locations, which I find incredibly eerie, is Annie was here and someone had heard her say, will you? And she said yes. So that was literally, you know, if we could put ours in a time machine back, we'd literally be touching her. So it's very surreal for me. But obviously you know the story, and
that was Elizabeth Long, the witness called Elizabeth Long, who I personally don't believe. Well, I don't know. I say I personally don't believe. I'm dubious about whether she actually saw anything. She was on her way to work at Spitalfields Fruit and Veg Market as a cart minder. Said she heard the brewery clock on Brick Lane there. That's how she timed it. Said she saw them as she was walking past on the way to work.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not. If it was true, as you say, we'd probably be bumping into her right now.
Yeah. So we've walked along Hanbury Street. Stop me here. So am I right in saying this was the location where the parted company?
Yes. Robert Paul went down here to work. Lechmere went over here to work, and they split up.
And that's as easy as that. And then, yeah, as I said, I'm using the word flippant. I mean, you know, could you have carried a day's work on knowing that you've just found a dead body? Because I couldn't, and I don't think normal people would.
No, the whole thing's a mystery.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll just go now, and we'll check the location where Mary Kelly was murdered, which is again really on Lechmere's route to work. So this is the location of Miller's Court, or Dorset Street, which ran down here. Mary Kelly's room on Miller's Court was roughly where lift C is in there, in that building. And this would also have been on one of either Brushfield Street over there or Dorset Street, would have been used by Lechmere going on his route to work to Pickford's in Broad Street over in this direction.
How on a scale of beyond words roughness was this? I mean, you know, I've heard the stories, the 4 coppers wouldn't go down and all this.
There's a lot of mythology about that. I don't believe there's any real evidence that at the time the police avoided going down Dorset Street.
I mean, would you say this would have been more rougher than the likes of Flower and Dean?
Much for a muchness. The reputation of what happened in the East End, the Jack the Ripper murders, the East End was far from being the worst part of London. There are other areas in Clerkenwell, in the South Bank, around Waterloo, were much worse for deprived areas. But the Jack the Ripper murders clearly had a bad effect on the East End. The reputation about the Jack the Ripper murders, who would want to live, what sort of decent, posh person wants to live in the East End after the Jack the Ripper murders? And in my opinion, if you look at the scales of deprivation they kept records of these things, the East End went downhill quite quickly between then and the 20s and the 30s. By the 20s, it was much poorer. And you can see when the Labour Party got its first seats in London, they weren't in the East End. The Conservatives used to win seats in the East End. It was quite late in becoming controlled by the Labour Party. And you can tell that's the sort of way you can gauge how working class the area was. But in my opinion, it declined due to the Jack the Ripper murders, and the terrible reputation that was attached to that led to the East End becoming the most deprived area in London.
So a lot of the documentaries will let you think that yes, they were horrific, they were horrendous, but London got better and it was better lit and the Queen was involved. So you're basically saying that wasn't exactly true? No.
If you look in the East End, there was a heavy concentration of lodging houses in the inner East End, Spitalfields, Whitechapel areas. If you take them out of the equation, it wasn't that poor an area. The concentration of those lodging houses skewed it to being poorer, but the general area of the East End wasn't that poor. It wasn't that deprived in comparative terms. By today's standards it was, but in comparative terms with other areas of London, it was far away from being the worst areas.
And obviously, you know, as I said, I've read books and documentaries, and they let you think, oh well, Queen Elizabeth lit the streets and all this.
Do you mean Victoria?
Queen Victoria, yeah. They lit the streets and that, but you know, you've only got to read Jack London's 1901. So that was what?
Jack London,
13, yeah?
well, yeah. Jack London was writing later, when it had gone downhill. B, Jack London was a polemicist. He was writing for a purpose to say this is how terrible it was. Also, he stayed in the worst places.
Yeah.
So, but he wanted to write a grimy, gritty story. If he said, "Oh, I went to the East End," it wasn't too bad actually. No one's going to read his book, are they?
Yeah.
I went there. I thought it'd be terrible. It wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
But you can tell.
So he went for maximum damage, doesn't he? Exploded.
Yeah. In my opinion, if you read Jack London, he's egging it up a bit. He's making it sound worse. And it was a bit later in the day. It was later than the Jack the Ripper murders, when things would have been getting a bit worse.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I've been here so many times, and you know, actually, the last time I was here in April, I could see 7 different parties having tours, and the light is burning brightly. Do you know what I mean? And I mean, will it still be the same in the second? You know, when it's been 200 years, you know, when
we're all dead.
yeah. But will it? Do you know what I mean? I mean, I personally think it will be. There's just never a case like it. You know, Paul Begg said to me, he said, you know, certainly when he walks around here, he doesn't see it as it is today. He sees it as 136 years ago. And there's something magical about the East End. You get it or you don't get it. Do you know what I mean? But as I think I said a couple of times, when you actually come to these locations, it really, you're just like, God, this is exactly what happened. Do you know what I mean?
I'll take you one last place. Yeah. I'll tell you one last story. No, because you just reminded me of something.
Yeah. You know, and I interviewed Paul Begg a couple of years back, and you know, a lot of the local councils they're trying to get away from it. You know, and he said to me, and I think I've used this quote: "Spitalfields is Jack the Ripper."
It is, yeah. So to finish, behind us is the Duke of Wellington, just around the corner from what was Dorset Street. Now, you're asking about the bad reputation that Dorset Street had, and there's a guy called McCarthy who owned Miller's Court and some lodging houses in Dorset Street, and they said that Dorset Street was the worst street in London, and because he had businesses there, he took great exception to that, and he arranged a meeting in here where he stood on the table and harangued all the local people in there, slagging off the press for saying that Dorset Street was the worst street in London, because you know, he didn't like it, it's bad for business. And that pub is where that happened.
So he's basically stood up, literally, you know, getting a crowd, getting the power of the people behind, and
rebel rousing.
You know, because I've been round here so many times and I've never noticed that pub, and that was literally a pub back in 1888.
Yeah, and if you come round this way, this is where some people might be interested. This building here is where Russell Edwards, who's the guy who has the shawl, had a pop-up shop at the time when the shawl business, the Kosminski shawl with the DNA, that's where he had his pop-up shop to publicise all that whole business. Okay, well thank you, Jamie. I hope you've enjoyed your trip down to London.
It's been an education. You know, as I said, I did a book which you're going to very kindly put the link in. I'll send you the link.
Yeah.
And I started off by saying, by no means am I an Edward Stow or a Richard Jones or Martin Fido, God rest him, Donald. You know, you can go on with I could probably name a dozen, maybe 15 serious, heavyweight, elite ripperologists. You know, these people are, you put, you know, I could never ever do that, but, you know, my interest is up there with anyone's pound for pound. And, you know, as I said, I take great pleasure in watching yours and your Richard Joneses and that, so it's been magnificent. Thank you so much.
Okay, well thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe, share and comment below. Thank you.